My mother-in-law banned me from the family vacation, then ended up serving me drinks at my resort. The words sliced through the elegant dining room like a blade through silk. Olivia, sweetheart, I'm sure you understand that this kind of getaway requires a certain sophistication. Perhaps it would be best if you stayed home this time. My wine glass trembled in my hand as Dorothy Hamilton's syrupy smile turned razor-sharp. Around the polished oak table, 14 pairs of eyes bounced between us like spectators at a tennis match. The sudden quiet was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife, broken only by someone's nervous throat clearing. In that frozen moment, 4 years of snide remarks, backhanded compliments, and calculated exclusions crystallized into perfect, burning clarity. My husband Jake tensed beside me, his jaw clenching. "Don't be silly, Dorothy," Jake's cousin Rebecca chimed in, her voice dripping false concern. "The whole family will be there. Grandpa Hamilton is flying in from Colorado. Jake can't possibly miss it just because his wife might feel uncomfortable in such upscale surroundings." I felt the weight of my iPhone in my purse. The same phone I'd used 8 months ago to finalize my acquisition of Sunset Cove Resort in the Hamptons. The very same resort Dorothy was now smugly announcing she'd reserved for the annual Hamilton family reunion. The irony tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. My name is Olivia Mark Hamilton. I'm 32, a former barista with a hidden empire worth more than most small countries' GDP. This is the story of how I taught my mother-in-law that the people she looked down on were actually standing on mountains. When I first met Jake Hamilton at Grind Coffee House in downtown Boston, where I worked while finishing my business degree at Northeastern, he was different from the other trust fund customers. Genuine, kind, never making me feel small because I was the one behind the espresso machine. Our connection was instant and real. He saw me, not just the green apron and name tag. What Jake's family never knew was that while I was pulling shots and cramming for exams, I'd been building a financial empire since college. Starting with penny stocks and Bitcoin when it was trading for pocket change, eventually expanding into real estate and tech startups. Those investments had multiplied into a fortune that would make the Hamiltons look like they were shopping at Dollar General. But I kept quiet, living modestly and reinvesting every profit. Jake knew about my wealth but respected my choice to keep it private. I had my reasons. From the moment Dorothy Hamilton discovered her precious son was dating the coffee girl, she made it her personal crusade to remind me I'd never measure up to Hamilton standards. Every family gathering became a masterclass in passive aggression. "Oh, Olivia, that's such a unique dress. Very affordable looking," she'd coo at Christmas dinner, while her society friends exchanged knowing glances. Or my personal favorite, "How quaint that you used to make lattes for a living. It must be such a relief to never have to work again." Each comment was a precision strike designed to put me firmly in my place, several rungs below her on the social ladder. I'd smile sweetly while mentally calculating my latest investment returns, letting her think she was winning. Now, watching Dorothy unveil her grand vacation plans like she was announcing the crown jewels, I caught Rebecca nodding enthusiastically at my exclusion. "She's absolutely right, Jake," Rebecca added, her voice saccharine. "Remember how out of place Olivia looked at the yacht club last Memorial Day? She barely spoke to anyone." I gently touched Jake's forearm. "It's okay," I said quietly, my voice steady as granite. "You should go with your family." Dorothy's smile widened like a shark scenting blood, mistaking my calm for surrender. The Hamilton family vacation would proceed exactly as she'd orchestrated. 2 weeks at the exclusive Sunset Cove Resort. Private beach, personal chefs, helicopter tours of the Hamptons. "Only the finest for the Hamiltons," she declared 20 minutes earlier, her chin lifted with aristocratic pride. What Dorothy didn't know was that I'd been making arrangements of my own. The morning after that disastrous dinner, I stood at our apartment window watching the Hamilton family caravan disappear toward Logan Airport. Jake had reluctantly agreed to go after I insisted, believing I'd planned a girls' weekend in Martha's Vineyard instead. Before he left, I'd pulled him aside and whispered my real plan in his ear. His eyes went wide as dinner plates before he broke into the biggest grin I'd seen in months and kissed me goodbye like we were in a romantic movie. As their plane vanished into the clouds, I opened my MacBook and logged into the resort's private management system. On my screen, I watched the staff preparing for the Hamilton arrival, following the very specific instructions I'd given during our video conference that morning. The truth was, I'd been planning this moment for almost a year. Last summer, when I'd overheard Dorothy bragging to her book club about wanting to book Sunset Cove for the family reunion, I'd recognized a golden opportunity. The resort had been hemorrhaging money due to Hurricane Sandy damage and COVID losses. The owner was quietly desperate for a buyer. Through a network of shell companies designed to protect my identity, I'd acquired not just the resort, but the entire 30-acre oceanfront property. I'd kept the existing management team in place, knowing this day would eventually come. My journey to this moment started 15 years ago in a cramped dorm room at Northeastern. While my roommates were out partying, I was hunched over my laptop, teaching myself about options trading and cryptocurrency mining. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination and a dream that their daughter would never have to struggle like they did. They'd sacrificed everything to put me through college, working double shifts at their small restaurant in Chinatown. I was determined to multiply their investment 100-fold. What started as turning my work-study wages into stock picks became an obsession with financial markets. I got lucky, or maybe it was skill mixed with timing. I bought Amazon at $47 a share, Tesla at $32. I mined Bitcoin when people thought it was monopoly money. By graduation, I had a portfolio worth more than most people's houses. By 25, I was worth 8 figures. By 30, 9 figures. But I kept serving coffee, kept living in my studio apartment, kept driving my Honda Civic. The wealth was intoxicating, but I'd learned something valuable from watching my parents. Money without wisdom was just expensive stupidity. I wanted to understand who people really were when they thought you had nothing to offer them. Dorothy Hamilton had shown me exactly who she was. Now, 12 hours later, my security cameras showed the Hamilton family stepping off their private jet onto the pristine tarmac of East Hampton Airport. Dorothy strutted across the asphalt in her Chanel suit and Louboutin heels, already composing Instagram captions in her head about this exclusive getaway that would make her country club friends green with envy. "Welcome to Sunset Cove Resort," the general manager, Marcus, greeted them with the practiced smile I'd seen during our morning briefing. His voice carried just enough deference to satisfy Dorothy's ego. Dorothy practically glowed. "Everything looks absolutely perfect. I trust the presidential suite is ready for me." Marcus consulted his iPad with the perfectly rehearsed concern we'd practiced. "Actually, there's been a slight change in arrangements. The owner is currently occupying the presidential suite." Dorothy's Botox-frozen forehead attempted to furrow. "That's impossible. I booked the entire resort. No other guests were supposed to be here." "The owner isn't a guest, Mrs. Hamilton," Marcus explained smoothly. "They own the property and have ultimate authority over all accommodations." "Well, who is this owner?" Dorothy's voice climbed several octaves, causing the other family members to drift closer like moths to a flame. "I demand to speak with them immediately." Marcus's smile could have lit up Times Square. "Of course. If you'll follow me to the main terrace, the owner has left specific instructions for your arrival." The family was escorted to an elegant stone terrace overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. On a massive outdoor screen, a video began playing. My face appeared in high definition, and I watched through the security feed as Dorothy's jaw dropped like a broken drawbridge. But that was just the beginning. "Hello, Hamilton family," my recorded self said, my voice warm and welcoming as morning sunshine. "Welcome to my resort. Yes, you heard that correctly. I own Sunset Cove Resort, along with several other luxury properties across New England." Through the security feed, I watched Dorothy collapse into the nearest wicker chair like someone had cut her puppet strings. Her designer purse tumbled to the flagstone terrace. Rebecca's face turned the color of old spinach. Even Grandpa Hamilton, who'd flown in from Aspen, looked like he'd seen a ghost driving a Ferrari. Jake tried to hide his grin behind his hand, having been briefed on the plan before he left Boston. "You see," I continued on screen, my tone conversational as if we were chatting over coffee, "while you were all busy judging me for making lattes and assuming I couldn't appreciate the finer things in life, I was building an empire. That coffee girl you tried to leave behind? She's worth more than the entire Hamilton family fortune combined." Dorothy made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the chair arms so tightly her knuckles went white. "Now, about your accommodations," I continued pleasantly. "Dorothy, you'll be staying in what we call the economy cottage. It's quite basic by your usual standards, but as you've always said, some people need to learn their proper place." The economy cottage was actually a perfectly nice 2-bedroom unit, but it lacked the marble bathrooms and ocean views of the premium suites. I'd had it specially prepared with furniture from IKEA instead of the usual Italian imports. "The rest of the family can choose from our standard rooms," I announced. Jake, of course, gets the owner's suite, since his family to both of us now. This is absolutely outrageous. Dorothy shrieked, finally finding her voice. I paid for the presidential suite. I have contracts. Marcus stepped forward with his clipboard. Your deposit has been fully refunded, Mrs. Hamilton. The owner's decisions are final and non-negotiable. On screen, I leaned forward conspiratorially. Oh, and Dorothy, remember how you said luxury resorts might be overwhelming for someone from my background? Let's put that theory to the test. I've arranged for you to work in our beach bar during your stay. Consider it an educational experience about judging people based on their employment. Dorothy's face went through more color changes than a mood ring. I absolutely will not. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, Marcus replied with unflappable calm. You're the mother-in-law of our owner, and she's left very specific instructions. If you prefer not to participate, you're welcome to leave, though the next commercial flight to Boston isn't until Thursday. What happened next was like watching a nature documentary about the collapse of a predator's territory. Dorothy threatened lawsuits that would bankrupt me, good luck with that, demanded to use phones that mysteriously had no signal, courtesy of a temporary cell tower adjustment I'd arranged, and even tried to charter a private helicopter, which was conveniently unavailable due to maintenance issues at all local services. The resort staff had been instructed to temporarily restrict outside communications and transportation. It wasn't kidnapping, it was a mandatory vacation from reality. The rest of the family watched in stunned silence as the mighty Dorothy Hamilton's iron control crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. Rebecca tried to comfort her, but even she seemed shell-shocked by this turn of events. Grandpa Hamilton, surprisingly, started chuckling. Well, I'll be damned, he wheezed, slapping his knee. The girl's got spine. Dorothy, you might have finally met your match. Whose side are you on? Dorothy snapped at him. The side of justice, sweetheart, the old man replied. You've been meaner than a rattlesnake to that girl for years. Maybe it's time you got a taste of your own medicine. As the chaos unfolded on my security monitors, I poured myself a glass of champagne in my Boston apartment and began packing for my own trip to the Hamptons. This was going to be the most entertaining 2 weeks of my life. But first, I had one more surprise to arrange. The next morning, I watched through the security cameras as Dorothy Hamilton stood in the resort staff uniform room, staring at the crisp white polo shirt and khaki shorts like they were contaminated with radioactive waste. There must be some mistake, she told Marissa, the head of housekeeping, who was trying to maintain professional composure while internally enjoying every second of this reversal of fortune. I don't work. I've never worked a service job in my entire life. I understand, Mrs. Hamilton, Marissa replied patiently. But the owner was very specific. All guests participating in the educational experience program must follow the same rules as regular staff members. Dorothy held up the uniform like it might bite her. This is humiliating. What will people think? The same things you've thought about service workers for years, Marissa said quietly, then caught herself. I mean, I'm sure you'll do just fine. Meanwhile, the rest of the Hamilton family was discovering their significantly downgraded accommodations. Rebecca found herself in a standard room with a parking lot view instead of her expected oceanfront suite. Jake's cousins were sharing rooms with bunk beds, despite being in their 30s. Only Jake was living in luxury, enjoying the owner's suite with its infinity pool, private chef, and helicopter pad. He called me that afternoon, barely able to contain his laughter. Babe, you should see this place, he whispered into his phone. It's like a palace. And Dorothy, oh man, Dorothy is having a complete meltdown. She spent 2 hours arguing with Marcus about the uniform policy. Is she wearing it? I asked, sipping my morning coffee from the same cafe where we'd met. She put it on, but she looks like someone forced her to wear a Halloween costume of her worst nightmare. The name tag is the best part. It says Dorothy, trainee in bright red letters. I had specifically requested that name tag. Every new employee at the resort wore a trainee badge for their first month, regardless of their previous experience. Dorothy would be no exception. How's everyone else handling it? I asked. Grandpa Hamilton thinks it's hilarious. He keeps asking Dorothy to bring him drinks just to watch her face turn purple. Rebecca is trying to stage some kind of family intervention, but nobody's really backing her up. I think they're all secretly enjoying watching Dorothy get knocked down a few pegs. That afternoon, Dorothy reported for her first shift at the Sunset Beach Bar. Her trainer was Miguel, a 23-year-old college student who was working at the resort to pay for his final year at Columbia Law School. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dorothy was being trained by exactly the kind of ambitious young person she'd spent years dismissing. "Okay, Mrs. Hamilton," Miguel said with the patience of a saint, "the most important thing is to always smile and make eye contact with customers. Even if they're rude or demanding, we maintain professional courtesy." Dorothy's smile looked like she was posing for a hostage photo. "Now, when someone orders a mojito, we muddle the mint first, then add the rum." Miguel demonstrated the technique while Dorothy watched with the expression of someone learning to defuse a bomb. Her first customer was Grandpa Hamilton, who had positioned himself at the bar with a wicked grin. "I'll have a whiskey sour, sweetheart," he said, emphasizing the pet name Dorothy had always used to condescend to service workers. "And make sure you muddle those cherries real good." "Whiskey sours don't have muddled cherries, Dad," Dorothy hissed through her forced smile. "The customer is always right," Miguel reminded her gently. "If he wants muddled cherries, we give him muddled cherries." For the next hour, I watched Dorothy struggle with basic bartending tasks while her own family members ordered increasingly complicated drinks. Rebecca requested a skinny margarita with organic agave and exactly 3 ice cubes. Jake's cousin wanted a Manhattan, but with bourbon instead of whiskey, and stirred, not shaken, but not too stirred. Each order was a small humiliation, a reversal of the power dynamic Dorothy had spent decades perfecting. And this was only day 1. By evening, Dorothy's perfectly styled hair was wilted from the humidity, her manicure was chipped from handling glasses, and her feet ached from standing for 6 hours straight. She collapsed into her economy cottage bed like she'd been hit by a truck. But the real lesson was just beginning. By day 4, Dorothy Hamilton looked like a completely different person. Her signature blonde highlights were dulled by salt air and sweat. Her hands, once soft as velvet from weekly spa treatments, now bore small cuts from handling glassware and bar tools. Most shocking of all, she'd started to develop actual calluses. I arrived at the resort that morning, stepping off my helicopter onto the private landing pad like some kind of corporate superhero. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the owner's suite, I could see Dorothy at her morning shift, mechanically slicing limes while Miguel patiently corrected her technique for the 100th time. "Remember, Mrs. Hamilton, consistent thickness on all slices. The presentation is just as important as the taste." Dorothy's jaw was clenched so tightly I was surprised her teeth hadn't cracked. 3 days of customer service had stripped away years of entitled attitude, revealing something raw and almost vulnerable underneath. I decided it was time for our first face-to-face encounter. Strolling down to the beach bar in my casual designer outfit, ironic, considering Dorothy's comments about my department store wardrobe, I took a seat directly in front of her station. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "I'll have a Bloody Mary, extra spicy, with a celery stick and 3 olives." Dorothy's head snapped up. For a moment, our eyes met across the bar, and I saw something I'd never seen in her face before, genuine humility mixed with exhaustion. "Coming right up," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from 4 days of forced politeness. I watched her prepare my drink with shaking hands. She forgot the celery stick twice and had to restart when she realized she'd used regular tomato juice instead of the premium brand. Miguel hovered nearby, ready to intervene if needed, but I held up a subtle hand to stop him. "Take your time," I told Dorothy. "Good service can't be rushed." When she finally set the drink in front of me, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Not the dramatic, manipulative tears she'd used to control family situations for years, but genuine exhaustion and defeat. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked, the words barely a whisper. I took a sip of the Bloody Mary. It was actually pretty good, better than I'd expected from someone who'd probably never made her own breakfast before this week. "This is excellent," I said, and I meant it. "You're learning quickly." Something flickered in her eyes. Not the cold anger I'd expected, but something closer to surprise. That evening, Jake found me on the private deck of the owner's suite, watching the sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and crimson. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me with 2 glasses of wine. "Honestly, I thought I'd feel more satisfied," I admitted. "I wanted to see her suffer, but now, I don't know. She just looks broken." "Maybe that was the point," Jake said softly. "Maybe she needed to be broken down before she could be built back up into someone better." Through the glass doors, We could see Dorothy in the staff dining room, eating dinner alone while other employees chatted and laughed around her. She looked isolated and small, nothing like the commanding presence who'd dominated family gatherings for years. "Tomorrow's her last shift," I said. "After that, she can go back to being a guest for the rest of the vacation." "And then what?" Jake asked. I honestly didn't know. I'd been so focused on the revenge that I hadn't thought much about what came after. Would Dorothy go back to her old ways the moment she got home? Would this experience change anything, or would it just make her more bitter and resentful? The answer came sooner than I expected. That night, around 11 p.m., there was a soft knock on my suite door. I opened it to find Dorothy standing in the hallway, still wearing her bar uniform, her face streaked with tears. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves crashing below. This was the conversation that would change everything. I stepped aside to let Dorothy into the suite, noting how she hesitated at the threshold like she was entering sacred ground. The woman who had spent years making me feel unwelcome in her family spaces now seemed afraid to enter mine. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward the espresso machine that had been installed specifically because I'd mentioned missing my barista days. She almost smiled at that. "I think I've had enough service industry experience for 1 week." We sat on opposite ends of the plush sectional sofa, the silence stretching between us like an ocean. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, moonlight danced on the water, creating a scene so beautiful it seemed inappropriate for the conversation we were about to have. "I need to know," Dorothy finally said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Why did you really do all this? And don't say it was just about teaching me a lesson. This level of elaborate revenge, it had to be about something deeper." I studied her face in the dim light. The perfectly applied makeup was long gone, revealing a woman who looked older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her manicured hands were wrapped around her knees like she was trying to hold herself together. "You want the truth?" I asked. "Fine." It wasn't just about the snide comments or the passive-aggressive dinner parties. It was about watching you systematically try to erase me from your son's life. Dorothy flinched like I'd slapped her. "Every family photo where you positioned people so I'd be on the edge, easy to crop out. Every family tradition you'd explain in detail to everyone else while I sat there like a stranger. Every time you'd plan something special for Jake and then add, 'Oh, but Olivia probably wouldn't be interested in that sort of thing.'" My voice was gaining strength, years of suppressed frustration finally finding words. "You made me feel like I was auditioning for a role I'd never get. Like no matter what I did, no matter how much Jake loved me, I'd always be the coffee girl who didn't belong." Dorothy's tears were flowing freely now. "I was protecting him," she whispered. "I was protecting my family." "From what? From me? From love? From someone who would walk through fire for your son?" "From disappointment," she burst out, her composure finally cracking completely. "From what happened to me." The confession hung in the air between us like a revelation. I waited, sensing there was more. "Jake's father wasn't my first husband," she said quietly. "My first marriage was to Robert Mark. Yes, a Chinese man, like your parents. I was young and rebellious and so in love I couldn't see straight. My parents disowned me. His parents thought I was a gold digger. We struggled for years while he tried to build his engineering firm." My breath caught. I'd never heard this story. We were happy, despite everything. Poor, but happy. Then Robert's business took off, and suddenly we had money, status, everything we'd dreamed of. But success changed him. He started working 18-hour days, traveling constantly. He had an affair with his business partner. Our marriage fell apart. Dorothy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing what was left of her mascara. "When I met Jake's father, I swore I'd never go through that kind of heartbreak again. I'd marry within my social circle, where I understood the rules, where I felt safe. So when Jake brought home another Asian woman who was beneath your social status," I said, understanding flooding through me. I saw history repeating itself. I thought I was saving him from what I went through. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that you weren't Robert. You weren't trying to hurt my son. You were just loving him." We sat in silence for several minutes, processing this revelation. Outside, a night bird called across the water, its song both mournful and beautiful. "The worst part," Dorothy continued, is that I became exactly the kind of person who would have looked down on me when I was young and struggling. I became everything I once hated. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because these 4 days in that uniform, being treated the way I've treated service workers my whole adult life, it reminded me who I used to be. Before the money and the social climbing and the fear. I used to be kind. She looked directly at me for the first time since entering the suite. I can't undo 4 years of cruelty. But I can try to do better. If you'll let me. The conversation that followed lasted until dawn. 2 women who had been enemies slowly finding common ground in shared stories of immigration, family expectations, and the complicated dance of love and acceptance. When Jake found us the next morning, we were asleep on opposite ends of the couch, emotionally drained but somehow at peace. The real transformation was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the kitmark of Dorothy's Beacon Hill mansion, watching her personally serve Thanksgiving dinner to a table that included not just the Hamilton family, but also Miguel, now in his final semester at Columbia Law, Marissa and her children, and 3 other Sunset Cove employees who had become like family to Dorothy. Olivia, could you help me carry the sweet potatoes? Dorothy asked, her voice warm and genuine in a way I'd never heard before. The transformation hadn't been instant or magical. Real change never is. There had been setbacks, awkward moments, and conversations that felt like emotional surgery without anesthesia. But Dorothy had done the work. 2 months after the resort incident, she'd surprised everyone by enrolling in a hospitality management course at Boston University's continuing education program. If I'm going to understand service, I need to learn it properly, she told a bewildered Jake. She'd also started a non-profit foundation providing business loans and mentorship to first-generation immigrants starting their own companies. The first recipient was a Vietnamese woman who wanted to open a restaurant in Dorchester, reminding Dorothy of her own parents' struggles decades earlier. But the most profound change was in how she treated people. The dismissive attitude towards servers, housekeepers, and anyone she perceived as beneath her social status had been replaced by genuine interest in their lives and dreams. She remembered names, asked about families, and tipped generously not for show, but because she'd learned what those jobs actually entailed. You know, Jake said, finding me in the kitmark as I helped Dorothy plate the apple pie, I never thought I'd see the day when you 2 would be cooking together. Life's full of surprises, Dorothy said, overhearing. Some of them even turn out to be blessings. The Sunset Cove Resort had become Dorothy's second home. She spent 1 week every month there, working different positions, sometimes housekeeping, sometimes the gift shop, occasionally helping in the kitmark. She called it her reality maintenance program. The resort had also implemented the Educational Experience Program officially, offering wealthy individuals the chance to work in service positions to gain perspective and empathy. It had become surprisingly popular among guilty-conscious socialites and executives looking for authentic team-building experiences. As we sat around the dinner table, Dorothy stood to make a toast, a tradition she'd never bothered with before. I want to thank everyone for being here today, she began, her voice steady but emotional. A year ago, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it was about bloodlines and social status and maintaining appearances. She looked directly at me. I was wrong. Family is about the people who love you enough to call you out when you're being terrible, and who still believe you can be better. Raising her glass, she continued, to second chances, hard lessons, and the courage to change. And to Olivia, who taught me that the best view in life comes from getting off your high horse and walking alongside the people you love. As glasses clinked around the table and conversations resumed, I caught Dorothy's eye and saw something that would have been impossible a year ago, genuine respect and affection. Later that evening, as Jake and I prepared to leave, Dorothy pulled me aside one more time. I have something for you, she said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny coffee cup. I know it's not much, she said, but I wanted you to have something to remember that even bitter things can become sweet with the right ingredients. I hugged her then, really hugged her, for the first time since I'd known her. Thank you, I whispered. Not for the bracelet. For proving that people can change. As we drove home through the Boston streets, Jake reached over and squeezed my hand. Any regrets about the Great Resort revenge plot? He asked with a grin. I thought about Dorothy in her trainee uniform, broken down and humiliated. Then I thought about Dorothy tonight, laughing with Miguel about his plans for law school, remembering to ask Marissa about her daughter's college applications, treating everyone at the table like they mattered. None, I said firmly. Sometimes people need to lose everything they think makes them important before they can discover what actually makes them valuable. The bracelet caught the light from the street lamps as we drove through the night, its tiny coffee cup charm sparkling like a promise that even the most bitter relationships can be transformed with patience, truth, and just the right amount of pressure applied at exactly the right time.